Thank you so much for attending today, and I'm very excited to be here. So today's topic is called Happily Moneyed, and so we're going to talk about how to really have a better relationship and communicate better with your significant other, not just around money, but really about any topic. And so before we begin today, I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on how I came to present here at Savvy Ladies. So as Maggie said, I am a CFP, but this is actually a career switch for me. I began my career off as a teacher, actually, and I'm also married. I've been married for about 20 years, so I have not just some professional experience on this topic, but definitely some personal experience on it as well. But I took some time off to raise my kids, and in that interim, I was thinking of maybe doing a career switch, but really had no idea what I might want to do after a career teaching. And one day, my sitter came home and had asked if she could borrow my car to take the kids somewhere, but she wanted to let me know that she was not insured. So she was not sure if I was covered, she was covered under my auto insurance. And I looked at her kind of dumbfounded, and I said, that's a great question. I don't know if you're insured. So I dusted off my policy once I found it. It was kind of the first time I ever even looked at my auto insurance. And I realized I didn't know how to find this answer. And so I called the number on my policy, it was a Geico insurance, and proceeded to speak to this broker for about 20 minutes, asking all these questions, not only if my sitter was covered under my insurance, which she was, but also if he could explain to me, please, what all of this stuff meant. I didn't even know what deductibles I had. I didn't know what comprehensive was versus collision coverage, and all these questions. And I put down the phone, and I was really embarrassed. Here I was in my 30s and had no idea on something so basic. And so the good thing is I didn't stay in embarrassment too long. I quickly pivoted to curiosity, and I thought, what else don't I know about my finances? And I started digging into our other insurance. I started looking into our investments. And at the end of that day, I realized this is so important, and I can't believe that people don't know about it. And it really created this new trajectory for me into personal finances. And I became a CFP and started working in traditional wealth management firms, as Maggie has mentioned. But the second aha moment came in 2013 after working with clients, many of whom were very high net worth clients. And I saw that they were not necessarily happy despite having a lot of wealth. I also noticed many couples would come in and be fighting about money or just be in disagreement over their financial goals. And then the final kind of piece I noticed among many of my clients was we would give them a lot of recommendations, and then a year later they wouldn't necessarily implement them. So there was like a behavioral piece missing, and it made me realize that I wanted to combine not only kind of the technical piece of personal finances, but also the behavioral or emotional piece and component that's so important to our financial lives. And so I became a coach and now created this firm, Financial Wealth Being, that focuses on primarily women and moms, and just having them really become more knowledgeable about financial education. And so the approach, even though I'm a CFP, is really to emphasize education and also coaching, like really understanding how to communicate about money, and also just have a better relationship with money overall. And so that's when I started my firm, and that brought me to Savvy Ladies today. So the topic today is on money and marriage. Now, I'm sure it doesn't come to a surprise to many of you that money is the number one stressor in couples' lives often. 70% of couples argue about money more than things like household chores, being together, sex, snoring, and what's for dinner, according to a Money Magazine survey. And these kind of disagreements around money and just kind of a nervousness about bringing up the topic about money with our spouse has created also a behavior called financial infidelity, where people are secretive about their money behaviors because they're worried about what their spouse might think. So 1 in 5 Americans in a relationship say they have spent $500 or more and have not told their partners about it, according to one survey. 6% maintain secret accounts or credit cards. And this is something that's like very common among many relationships. Another survey found that, not surprisingly, the higher a couple's debt burden, the more likely they are to argue about money. Of course, debt being such a stressor, this is no surprise that it infiltrates other aspects of a relationship and just makes it harder to discuss money in general. But it's not all bad news. I want to end with something that Dave Ramsey found out about in a survey. Again, not surprisingly, but couples in healthier marriages are much more likely to talk about money and dreams and make long-term financial goals when they are in a healthier relationship. And again, this seems so obvious, but the reason why I included this last sentence here, this last finding by Dave Ramsey, is really the emphasis on healthy marriages. Because oftentimes we come into these presentations, and especially if it's being presented by a CFP, and the emphasis is on, kind of tactical movements, like what do we do in terms of our joint accounts? How do we, better plan for our retirement together? It's very specific to the strategies. But even before you go to that, I really want to just emphasize, what does it mean to be in a healthy relationship? Because if you're in a healthy relationship, you can talk about anything together, whether it's marriage or money or parenting or whatever those issues are. But the emphasis is really, what does it mean to be in a healthy relationship? How can you strengthen and make your relationship that much stronger so that you are able to come up with these and talk through these kind of what can be a difficult discussion in the most effective way. So that's really the emphasis on today. What I'm going to be spending a lot of time on today is how to really have a healthy relationship. So I'm putting on more my coaching hat today more than my CFP hat. So that brings us to, why do couples argue in the first place? Well, it all boils down to communication. And this may seem obvious, but I think it's really important because we often take communication for granted, right? I mean, it's something that we've done since we were 1, 2 years old when we first learned to talk. So we think that it should be easy, but communicating effectively is actually quite complex, right? And I'm going to illustrate this with this using this kind of process, right? So if you think about communicating, there's really 4 parts to it, right? It starts off with a thought, right? You have a thought that you want to express. And then you go to number 2 and you express that verbally. The next step is that the person on the receiving end has to hear it, and then they interpret it. So you can see here that while we think communication is like a quick automatic thing, it really involves at the minimum 4 steps. And at each of these stages, something can break down, right? Miscommunication can happen. And I'll also say it's almost kind of like the game of telephone, right? If you imagine like playing that game of telephone when you're younger, any of those points can break down. And this is kind of an example of that. In addition, from that communication, actions happen, right? So that's that action line underneath as a result of that verbal interaction, where then other things can get miscommunicated or misinterpreted. So I'm going to illustrate this with an example having to do with finances, right? So you might one day have a thought, oh my gosh, there's no way we're going to be able to afford college tuition for our kids. And that's the thought you have. So you might express this to your partner as, honey, we really need to save in a 529 plan. Okay? So that's your thought and how you express that thought that you have that day. Your partner hears you say, we need to save in a 529 plan, and they might interpret that as, great, now we have a plan for college savings. And so you can see how you can go from someone starting to be really worried but then the other person interprets that and actually feels less worried. And the action, just a hypothetical action from that interaction, could be the first spouse, they think they have this discussion, they create a 529 plan, and they're still worried, right, because they start off worried, and they go to open up the plan and start saving and want to funnel all their extra surplus into savings. Well, the second person, the spouse, might leave that interaction and feel more relieved and less worried because now they have a plan in place, and it actually might lead to spending in a kind of weird way. It can actually relieve his or her anxiety and might think that we have a plan in place, and therefore that person might take extra spending, extra kind of surplus, cash surplus, and use it to spend because now they have a plan in place, and it could lead to completely different interactions. So that's just a common example. I'd love you to think about your own examples where kind of communication can break down. But where I want to spend a lot of time today is to talk about what to do about it, but in a kind of unconventional way. And so you may have heard past experts really hone in on how to convey what you want to say really clearly to the other person so that the person really understands what you're thinking and gets on board, and kind of how to persuade the other person to kind of go over to your side. What I'm suggesting today is actually something quite different. What I want invite you to consider is to not actually consider the other person at all. I want you to think about more, what are you doing in the conversation? And don't even worry about how the other person interprets it or thinks about it, but really try to stay in control of your own money beliefs and your own actions. And instead, look at the other person and almost, in a way, not even care what the other person thinks or does, but just love and accept them, and not try to change at all what the other person is doing. And I know this is a little unconventional. I know I'm already hearing many of you probably in your head saying, wait a minute, you don't know my spouse. I have to change him or her and his or her behavior. It's awful. But what I wanted you to do is really encourage you to direct yourself more towards yourself and what you want to do and what outcomes you want and what you can control. Because the truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, you can't control another person. As much as we want to think we can, we can't. And a huge source of couples arguing and fighting is the belief that they can actually control another person over to their side. And a lot of conflicts happen when that person is actually not doing the things that we want them to do. And so I'm going to talk about how you can start to let go of expectations that you have on the other person and really just accept that person for what they're doing and focus in more on what you are doing to create your own happiness and own wealth in many respects. So I'm going to do this by introducing a coaching concept, which is probably very new to most of you, and that's called the manual. The manual is an instruction guide that you have for someone in your life about how you would like them to behave so you can feel good and happy. All of us, I think, I have not come across one client yet who doesn't have a manual. So these are basically unspoken, oftentimes, sometimes spoken rules, if you will, or instructions on how we want the other person to behave. And the key point here that I want to emphasize is we expect them to behave a certain way, and if they don't, we somehow then blame them, and it then affects our own mood and our own happiness and our own actions, to be honest. While a manual can help us feel in control, it actually makes us more dependent upon someone else and their behavior. Manuals are often unspoken. We kind of assume they should know what to do and don't actually say it. And again, it relinquishes our own responsibility for our well-being, and it really gives that responsibility too much to somebody else. An example of manuals and instructions that we have for people could be anything from like something to do with household chores, right? That's a very common, conflict that happens with marriages, where you expect someone and assume they're going to do certain chores around the house. You have to take out the garbage, you have to cook dinner, you have to grocery shopping, and we get annoyed when that stuff doesn't happen. And we expect them to kind of follow our kind of rule book, if you will, on what they should do around the house. When it comes to finances, a manual could look something like this. We might have expectations around how much money our partner needs to make. We might have expectations around how much they're allowed to spend, and when they spend money, what they should be spending on. If things aren't practical, it's a waste of money. We might have kind of a manual on what's acceptable spending. We may create a budget and just assume or demand that another person follows it, and that everything has to be exactly equal, 50-50. The last one is an interesting one that I've seen in some clients, where they might have a kind of, again, unspoken or even spoken assumption on what is the responsibility of someone else based on their own belief system. So they might think, I don't like to deal with investments. I think they're complicated. You should handle them. And actually really just expect that person to do it, whether or not he or she wants to do it. But it's because something you decided and then kind of put on the other person. So I want you today to just be aware of your own manuals and where you might have certain expectations that might make the relationship unproductive. It's really important to understand that there's a difference between manuals and boundaries in our relationship. A boundary is something you want in your relationship. A boundary is healthy. It's something that you create for yourself. It's a request that you make of somebody else to change, and a consequence of what you will do in order to self-protect if the boundary is somehow violated. Now, the important thing to remember here is boundaries have to do with self-protection, and they come out of love and not control. So it's not an ultimatum, as if you have to follow my budget or else I'm going to. It's not something like that. But it's something that comes from a place of love and acceptance of the other person, but just an action that you're going to take if you feel like something is violated. A very common boundary that doesn't have to do with finances could be like, you might have no smoking in my car, type of rule. It's your personal space that you're protecting, and you don't want anyone to smoke in your car. If somebody smokes in your car, they're allowed to smoke generally. You're not telling, if it's your best friend, you're not telling them they can't smoke. But in your car, they're not supposed to smoke, and if they want to smoke, they have to take their smoking elsewhere. So that's an example of a healthy boundary. So with regard to you and your partner, you can have boundaries like this as well. Boundaries with regard to finances and marriage could look like something like this. You seem like you're okay with having credit card debt. So let's say your partner tends to spend a lot more on credit than it's comfortable for you, and it's starting to affect your credit score. So you're not telling them that they have to change their behavior. While you might think it's probably better for them to change their behavior, you're accepting their behavior. You recognize that they're an adult and can do what they want, but you're just saying, listen, this might affect my score now, so I'm taking myself off your card and having my own card. Another healthy boundary with regard to, say, a joint account. Let's say you have a joint account where you pay your household bills. You could set a boundary that says, let's call each other, if the spending goes over, if you ever write a check over $1,000 in the joint account, because it might prevent me from being able to pay my bills or be able to kind of handle my own responsibilities. So that's kind of in violation of, you're protecting yourself and your ability to do something, right? Another example from a client, let's say your spouse has a different risk tolerance with regard to stock buying and investments, and really loves to kind of follow the latest stock trends, and maybe might even be really successful at it, but it makes you uncomfortable and you want to make sure your retirement savings is protected. A very healthy boundary could be, hey, awesome, you like to do that. I personally have no interest and I don't want to, and I think it's risky. So you can do that on this account, but I am going to have a separate retirement savings and in order to protect my own, future investments. So I invite you to think about your own relationships and think about, again, where might you have manuals for your partner that make it difficult because you are trying to change that person rather than accept and love them. And vice versa, where are there some boundaries that either could be put in place, or where do you already have really healthy boundaries that work for your partnership? That, again, comes from a place of love for yourself and not a place of controlling the other person. And I know we're going to get a lot of questions on this, so I'm going to just leave it at that. At this point, this can be a complicated concept. So at this point, I just want you to invite you to consider where this shows up in your own relationship. The other point I want to bring up with regard to communication and kind of just staying in your own space is it's really important before you even try to communicate to somebody else what your desires are, what your goals are, what your needs are, is to really be very self-aware of your own money beliefs and your own money history. Okay, so we all come with our own money beliefs. There are oftentimes money beliefs that were passed down from our childhood or from authority figures or from just society that oftentimes we don't even realize that we're choosing to believe in. We're just thinking they're universal, that they're truths. But the truth is actually that they're choices, they're thoughts that you're choosing to believe as an adult, and that you can choose to believe something entirely different if you want, if that money belief that you have is not serving you or serving your marriage, right? So an easy way to get at your money beliefs, if this is a new concept to you, is simply to Google money idioms and what comes up, and look at what do you believe in, right? So like little common phrases might come up, such as money doesn't grow on trees, right? Is that something that was passed on to you growing up? You might have a belief that people with a lot of money are selfish or they're greedy, right? And so that might have a limit, that might create a kind of unconscious limit on how much you think you can spend, you can save, or how much you can think you can earn, right? You might subconsciously be limiting yourself in that way because you have this money belief that people with a lot of money are somehow bad people. So in my personal experience, I had a belief that seemed really good at first. I had this belief, neither borrower or lender be. Now, this is not something that my parents quoted to me at the dinner time, or anything like that. But I did kind of grow up with a sense that it was bad to have debt. And you can see as a CFP, this is a great, and just as a, just generally for finances in general, that's a great belief to have, right? It really served me for many, many years in a sense of I never really took out credit card loans or had loans. I was very careful about saving, and it really helped me to create a good kind of nest egg for myself and my family. But even pretty money thoughts like this can be detrimental. This belief made me a little frugal. And when I went to start my business in 2016, I saw this where I really had a hard time growing my business in the beginning because I did not want to make any kind of investment in the business. I was really came up with the belief that if I earn some money, that goes into the business, but it was very hard for me to go into debt for the business first and to make significant investments in software and in infrastructure because I was worried about debt. And so you can see in that situation where even a kind of seemingly positive money thought can sometimes, not produce the results that you want. So a tip that I have here is, even before you go to even talk to your significant other or a loved one about money, be really aware of what your own money beliefs are. And then be intentional about them. So you may have money beliefs, but I encourage you to create your own. So in many respects, it doesn't matter how you were taught about money. You really, as an adult, can come up with your own belief system around money, beginning with the values that you have. And I encourage you to come up with one for yourself first, and then depending on how your relationship works, come up with one together with your partner. As an example, here are just some, this is not one together because some of these kind of contradict each other, but these are some examples of core money beliefs that some of my clients have come up with and have written down for themselves. So with my clients, I encourage them to literally have a piece of paper and actually go through the exercise of creating a money manifesto. What are your core beliefs around money? And this is really great because it's almost like a guidepost for you for any of your money decisions that will follow. So for example, I'm going to take one of these. If one of your core money beliefs, which I'm seeing with a lot of younger people, is, this is on the second page here, I value freedom and seeing the world, not being tied to one place or bogged down with many possessions. If that's kind of a core belief that you have for your life and for your finances, and you actually go through the exercise of writing that down, then like a few months later when you see your friend and his spouse go to buy a house and you're starting to feel like insecure and wondering if you're not financially ahead or you should be doing this or that and starting comparing yourself to the Joneses, you can go back to your money manifesto and look at it and remind yourself, well, no, that's great for him and her, but I believe that, I don't want to be tied down, and so I'm okay renting for now because I'd rather take my money, save it, and also use it to travel and do some other things. So these are just some other ones. You can have one for you and your spouse. Like my spouse and I can have different money goals and still be perfectly happy. You can decide you want to save 10 times your salary by the time you're 50. And your spouse could be thinking that they don't need that much money. And that's perfectly okay. Don't judge that person for their goal. It's their goal. And just be happy with your own. Now, again, I do encourage you to try to come up with also one as a couple. So once you do individual ones, it would be interesting to see where you overlap. And it's from that place where they intersect where you can start to jointly plan together. This is just an example of a money belief. For sake of time, I'm not going to go over it. A money manifesto. This is actually something that I have on my website. This is the money manifesto that I created for my business. So you just don't even have to do it for your personal finances. You can just do it for many, wherever money relates in your life, your job, for example. So I created this for my business. It's kind of what I believe and how I want to approach my clients with. So if you're interested in like what a money manifesto looks like or where to even start, you can head over to my website. It's on the homepage and take a look at it. But these are kind of my core money beliefs that I take with me personally and also professionally for my clients. Such as, like, this is the one I really believe in. As I started out with, I really believe that you need to be your own best advocate for when it comes to finances. So even if you seek the advice of a financial planner or some other accountant or anyone, at the end of the day, you need some basic knowledge so that you can ask informed questions and be your own advocate, even though they're the expert, right? So that's something I tend to believe with regard to money. So just to summarize and wrap up, be very cognizant of your own money beliefs. Don't just default to them, but be intentional about what you want to choose to believe about money. When you're approaching your relationship and handling finances together, understand that you cannot control another person. And the more you can accept and love them, just like those vows that you took in the beginning of when you were married, that you accept them for better, for worse, I fully accept them and that person and wherever they are on their own financial journey. And then instead direct your energies to what can you control about yourself. What thoughts do you want to believe about money? What financial outcomes do I want for myself? And what positive actions can I take to get there, while supporting the other person and their own financial journey? In terms of practical matters, because I know we've kind of been speaking at a high level, but practically speaking, just some common things that you can do is, one, just find some common ground if you can by trying to encourage each other to do a money manifesto and find where where you might agree with regard to money. Identify your own deal breakers, which are basically your boundaries. Where are those places where, you know what, it's really starting to infringe on something that you believe in terms of your own self-protection, preservation, where you're able to kind of draw a line if another person is violating that. Throw out the manuals, though. So all the little things that you're nitpicking on, where you're trying to control another person's behavior and try to make them more like you, throw those out. Practically speaking, in the beginning of a relationship, I definitely believe that you should have scheduled money meetings, which are different from date nights. I know you can make them, fun or whatever, but these are kind of just formal meetings. Well, they can be informal as well, but they're formal in the sense that they're scheduled and you have a particular money goal to discuss or money, topic to discuss. I recommend that these be really short. I do not believe that they should be longer than 45 minutes. And they should be consistent in the beginning. So if this is something new to you, have it regular. It does not have to be every week, but if you can make it every week or at least once a month, that's great. Total transparency. I do not conduct these anymore with my spouse. As I mentioned, I've been married for over 20 years now. We don't really do this anymore. We kind of do it annually or as needed when something comes up, like if there's a job switch that somebody's doing or a big, something big that another me or my spouse is thinking of doing, we'll have a money meeting to discuss it. But we don't really have these kind of regular every Sunday, let's talk about something. But I highly encourage it in the beginning or if this is new to you. And we started the conversation today talking about how couples argue, but I don't want you to think you're always arguing. I am sure all of you have some things, some aspects of your relationship that you're doing well together. So make sure you focus in on that. Even if it's financially speaking, you can find at least one thing that you're doing together well financially. So find out what those are and make sure you celebrate them and acknowledge them. And finally, I'll leave you with, it's okay to have separate and joint accounts, budgets, and goals. Not everything has to be merged. You come into a marriage or relationship as individuals, and it's okay to, and actually encouraged to keep your individuality even though you are in a partnership. So if you would like more information about some of the things that we discussed together, here are 3 ways that you can connect with me. You can get on my website and just get on my email list. I really don't email that often, so it's not like I'm going to bombard you, but at least you'll be updated and also receive some practical tips on some of the things that we discussed on marriage and money. I do one-on-one coaching, both with couples and individually, on really financial goals and really focusing on not just marriage, but really just how to achieve your own financial goals over time. And finally, I am introducing a membership next year. So if you are interested in kind of ongoing coaching or kind of group coaching at a more affordable price, again, there'll be updates on that. So please make sure to get on the list and sign on to the website and email so you know when those kind of offerings are happening. So thank you so much for joining. I hope I gave you some interesting thoughts to think about and new ideas and concepts. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was really, really great. We'll move on to Q&A now. So if you have a question, you can use the chat box or you can email info@savvyladies.org. So I saw we had a question come in during the presentation, and this first question is, my husband and I have very different beliefs on spending money. He's more into material items, and I'm more into experiences. It doesn't feel like we'll ever really see eye to eye on this. Do you have some tips for this person, Jennifer?
Yeah, so I would say it kind of relates to really the whole presentation really is I think that's okay. I think where a lot of conflict happens is that you really want to try to change that person to get more to think like you. And I think if he really likes material things more than you do and you want more experiences, that probably means that you're going to be doing some things separately, which doesn't mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that, that your marriage is worse or less intimate, right? It just means that you're showing up completely as individuals, right? And so in that, practically speaking, what that might look like is that you may have different budgets, okay? So might probably would be a good thing for him to just have a separate budget on material things, because otherwise if you put everything joint, you might feel threatened because everything, he's spending money on things that you don't think is to be money spent, and you want to actually spend that money on experiences, right? So I would suggest maybe having kind of like a a separate account for those kind of material items versus experiential items, and then just have maybe a joint account for the things that you do agree on spending together. So even though it's generally you like experiences more than he does, is there like a vacation or something that he does want to do together? And if so, maybe that's where you start budgeting jointly for in a joint account. Similarly with you with the consumer items. So I would say a lot of this does apply. It's not like setting a boundary like you have to spend the way I want you to spend. It's more recognizing that, that you're going to drop the manual that he should spend a certain way, and that he's going to drop a manual that you should spend a different way. Fully own that you like to spend in different ways. And then kind of do a workaround for that in terms of your budget and joint accounts. The other thing I'll mention is it's really important too, you can absolutely request that someone do something. Like, I don't want you to completely just not say anything. Like, you can certainly say, hey, I think, it might be great for you to spend less. Or I think, it seems like you might hurt your credit score if you do X, Y, and Z. So it's different to say something and mention something and maybe sometimes offer some, insight. But where a manual gets unproductive is where you expect them to follow it and then your mood changes when they don't. I think that is a big distinction. So you can absolutely set expectations. Just don't expect them to be met and then be mad when they're not.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Jennifer. Another question we have for you is, my partner and I have young kids. I worry that we have such different ideas of raising them when it comes to money. Can you make some suggestions on how to compromise?
Make sure that the worries are grounded in something very concrete and that you're not kind of projecting too quickly, because when you do that, that can really affect how you show up in the conversation, right? Because, and again, this is a hypothetical, but if I show up really worried and kind of almost in kind of catastrophe mode and my spouse is not there yet, I can be frustrated that they don't see kind of the projections I'm seeing in my head. So it's really important to write it down and make sure that it's grounded in kind of the reality of the situation. And then with kids, you're right. With kids, it can get a little bit more complicated. But I will say that going back to kind of the joint manifesto, it really comes down to first kind of stepping back before you kind of go into the details of how much we should save in a 529 plan or for their education or for allowance. First, step back and say, what do we believe about our kids? Does he believe that kids should not have any money, right? Like that they should kind of be self-sufficient? And if you really come to very different ideas on the, where the kids are, and again, this is a little unconventional, so I understand that, but I think it's okay to raise kids with different money beliefs. They're not going to be confused. They're just going to get different belief systems from you and your husband. which actually might be something that ends up to be a really good thing, because then they can kind of, kind of compare them as they grow older. So from you, they might just come up with more of an idea, oh, it's good to kind of save and be practical. And from your spouse, it might be, oh, no, I have to kind of bootstrap my way, and make my own kind of situation. So if it really comes down to having very different money beliefs, I think that actually can be not necessarily a source of conflict.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question for you is asking, what are the top 3 things a couple should definitely do to create a healthy money environment in the marriage?
So one is, and again, I'm sorry if I repeat myself, but one is just check in with yourself and make sure that you're really clear on your own beliefs and triggers and expectations and boundaries, all of those things, right? Because if you're not clear when you have a conversation with your spouse, you may be putting a lot of things into the conversation that really shouldn't be there. So get really clear on your own money beliefs and systems. 2, I definitely think, again, as I said, it's really good to establish a habit of talking regularly around money. If your spouse now is really not on board with that, then I have other suggestions for that. I mean, it may be that you may just have to take on more kind of money tasks on your own and still accept that person for where they are, but it just may mean that you have to kind of find another way to kind of manage a lot of the money on your own. But if you can, and if your partner is open to it, to simply have kind of regular scheduled short money discussions. And then 3, really kind of then once you can do that, then that's when you kind of go into the practical planning stages, whether that's with a financial planner or using kind of money education, and figure out, okay, given that this is kind of what I believe, what you believe, what we jointly believe and want, what are some of the specific tactics now that we do? Do we have a joint account? Do we also have separate accounts? What does that mean for our cards? Like who does what? Are you okay bill paying and me okay handling more of the investments? So it's from that point that you then start having discussions on kind of more of the nitty-gritty kind of practical matters on money, which you then can use in your money meetings to talk about further. So I hope that answered your question, but if it didn't, then you can ask a follow-up.
Okay, great. I'll let you know if we have a follow-up. Those are the questions we have for you, Jennifer, and I'm just going to advance your slide here. So Jennifer has shared her contact information, which we will be sending out along with the links from the previous slide. So I want to thank you, Jennifer, for an excellent presentation. Thanks for taking the time to answer our questions, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.